What if your garden could start filling itself? Not because you bought more plants, not because you spent every spring starting trays of seedlings, not because you kept driving back to the nursery every time a bed looked empty, but because the right plants quietly did the work for you. Most gardeners have been trained to think a beautiful garden has to be rebuilt every season. Buy new flowers, fill the gaps, replace what died, pull out tired plants, start again next year. That cycle gets expensive and honestly, it gets exhausting. But self-seeding plants follow a different rhythm. They bloom. They feed bees, butterflies, birds, and beneficial insects. Then they drop their seed exactly where the garden already knows they can grow. And the next season, small green seedlings begin appearing on their own. Not randomly, not completely out of control, but in the open spaces, soft edges, gravel paths, and lightly disturbed soil where life has room to return. That is when a garden starts feeling different. Less like a decoration project, more like a living system. Planting self-seeders in June gives many of them enough time to root, grow, flower, and begin setting seed before the season ends. Some will bloom this year. Others will build strong rosettes and explode next spring. But the long-term effect is the same. You plant once, then the garden begins creating its own next generation. Today, we are going through 13 of the best self-seeding plants you can start in June if you want a garden that becomes fuller every year with less money and less replanting. Some are native wildflowers. Some are cottage garden classics. Some are medicinal herbs with histories going back centuries. Some attract birds and pollinators so strongly that the garden becomes alive with movement. But there is one important thing to understand before we begin. Self-seeding does not mean doing nothing forever. It means guiding the wildness. You let seed heads mature. You leave enough bare soil for germination. Then you thin, move, or remove seedlings where needed. That is the secret. Not control, not neglect, guided abundance. And we will begin with one of the most reliable self-seeding flowers in American gardens, the golden plant that can turn one small patch into a glowing summer colony. Black-eyed Susan is the plant that proves a garden can multiply without you constantly spending money. One small patch can become a glowing colony over time, because Rudbeckia hirta knows exactly how to replant itself. The flowers are simple but powerful. Golden yellow petals, dark chocolate centers, a shape that catches summer light so clearly it almost seems to glow from across the yard. From midsummer into fall, Black-eyed Susan keeps producing color during the exact season when many gardens begin looking tired. But the real magic happens after the flowers fade. Each seed head holds dozens of seeds, and a mature plant can drop enough to create an entirely new generation the following spring. Give those seeds bare soil or lightly disturbed ground, and they often germinate naturally after winter. Cold prepares them for growth. That is why this plant has spread so successfully across meadows, roadsides, prairies, and home gardens for generations. It does not need perfect conditions. It needs sunlight, drainage, and a little room. Plant Black-eyed Susan in full sun with average well-drained soil in USDA zones 3 through 9. June planting gives young plants time to establish roots before summer becomes too harsh, and gives stronger plants a chance to flower and set seed by fall. Do not rush to deadhead every spent bloom. Leave many seed heads standing through winter. Birds, especially finches, will feed from them during cold months, and the remaining seeds will fall naturally into the soil below. In spring, small seedlings may appear around the parent plant. Thin them to about 12 to 18 inches apart so they do not crowd one another. Move extras while they are still young, or let a few fill empty spaces naturally. That is how Black-eyed Susan changes a garden. Not all at once, season by season. A few flowers become a drift becomes a border, and eventually, the garden begins looking fuller without you buying another tray of plants. Purple coneflower is one of the best self-seeding plants for gardeners who want beauty and wildlife value at the same time. Echinacea purpura produces large, rosy purple petals around raised orange-brown cones, creating one of the most recognizable flower shapes in American gardens. It looks strong, simple, almost prairie-built. And that is exactly why it works so well. This plant is native to the central United States, where it evolved in open prairies, meadows, and sunny grasslands. That background matters because purple coneflower does not need rich soil or constant attention to perform beautifully. It wants full sun, average well-drained soil, and enough space to build a strong root system. In USDA, zones 3 through 9, it returns reliably and begins forming larger clumps with time. But the self-seeding power comes after flowering. When the petals fade, the central cones mature into seed heads. Many gardeners cut them down too early because they want the garden to look clean. Do not do that if you want the plant to spread. Leave the cones standing through fall and winter. Goldfinches and other small birds will perch directly on the seed heads and feed from them during the cold months. Whatever seeds remain will drop naturally, experience winter cold, and germinate around the parent plant the following spring. That is how a few coneflowers slowly become a living colony. June planting gives young plants time to establish before winter and start building the root strength they need for long-term performance. The first year may look modest. The second year becomes stronger. By the third season, the patch often begins to feel permanent. Seedlings usually appear within a short distance of the original plant. Move them while small if you want to fill another bed, or thin them if they emerge too closely together. And while the garden is multiplying, pollinators benefit too. Butterflies visit the flowers throughout summer. Native bees work the cones intensely. Birds return in winter. That is the real value of purple coneflower. It does not simply reseed. It keeps the garden alive across multiple seasons. Columbine brings something different into a self-seeding garden. Surprise. Most plants try to repeat themselves. Columbine likes to change. Aquilegia produces delicate spurred flowers that look almost suspended in the air, with colors ranging from deep purple and blue to pink, red, yellow, white, and soft mixed tones. But the real charm begins after it starts self-seeding. Because columbines cross-pollinate easily, seedlings do not always look exactly like the parent plant. One year, you may have violet flowers. The next year, a pale yellow seedling appears nearby, then a soft pink one, then a two-tone flower you never planted at all. That is what makes columbine feel alive. The garden becomes slightly different every spring. Not chaotic, not random, just gently unpredictable. Plant columbine in part shade to full sun, with well-drained, humus-rich soil in USDA, zones 3 through 8. It especially appreciates cooler conditions, so in hotter regions, morning sun with afternoon shade usually works best. June planting gives young plants time to establish roots before the hardest part of summer arrives, though some may slow down or go partly dormant during extreme heat before returning stronger in fall. The self-seeding process is simple. After flowering, let the papery seed pods dry fully on the plant. Do not deadhead if you want new plants. When the pods mature, they split open and scatter small dark seeds into the soil below. Seedlings may appear in fall or the following spring. Let them grow until they are at least a few inches tall before thinning or transplanting. Move them too early, and the roots may not handle the disturbance well. Columbine is also valuable for wildlife. The long nectar spurs attract hummingbirds, bumblebees, and other pollinators in the spring window, when many summer flowers have not started yet. That early season support matters. A garden full of columbine does not feel static. It feels like a conversation between seasons, pollinators, and chance. And that is why many gardeners let it wander a little. Because sometimes, the best part of a self-seeding garden is not control. It is discovering what the garden decided to create while you were not looking. Foxglove is one of the most dramatic self-seeders you can plant in June. Tall flower spikes rise above the garden in shades of purple, pink, cream, and white, each stem lined with tubular bells that look like they belong in an old cottage painting. When they bloom, they stop people, and bumblebees love them. The shape of the flower almost seems designed for them. A bumblebee disappears inside one tube, backs out covered in pollen, then moves straight into the next bloom. That kind of movement makes the garden feel alive. But foxglove has one important truth every gardener needs to understand. Digitalis purpurea is usually not a true long-lived perennial. It behaves like a biennial. Year 1, it grows a low rosette of leaves. Year 2, it sends up the tall flower spikes. After blooming and setting seed, the original plant often dies. But if you let it self-seed, foxglove can feel permanent in the garden because new seedlings keep replacing the old plants. That is the secret. You are not keeping one plant alive forever. You are creating a cycle. June is a good time to plant young foxglove seedlings because they can build strong roots and leafy rosettes before winter. The following season, they bloom. After flowering, do not cut every spike down immediately. Let some seed stalks mature, dry, and release their tiny seeds naturally. Foxglove seeds need light contact with the soil, so bare or lightly disturbed ground gives them the best chance. Plant foxglove in part shade to full sun with moist, well-drained, humus-rich soil in USDA, zones 4 through 9. It looks especially beautiful along woodland edges, fences, cottage borders, and shaded paths. But there is one serious caution. Foxglove is toxic. Every part of the plant contains cardiac glycosides, compounds that can affect heart function if ingested. So if you have small children, dogs, cats, or grazing animals that might chew garden plants, place foxglove carefully or choose something safer. Foxglove is beautiful, powerful, and unforgettable, but it belongs in gardens where its self-seeding cycle and its toxicity are both clearly understood. Hollyhock is the kind of flower that makes a garden feel older than it really is. Tall vertical stalks rise like living towers, covered in large, silky blooms in shades of white, pink, red, yellow, burgundy, and nearly black. Plant them against a fence or along the back of a border, and suddenly the garden has that old cottage feeling people spend years trying to recreate. But hollyhock works best when you understand its rhythm. Alcea rosea is often treated like a perennial, but many plants behave more like biennials or short-lived perennials. The first year, they usually form a strong, leafy rosette. The second year, they send up tall flower stalks. Then, after blooming and setting seed, the original plant may decline. That sounds disappointing until you realize what hollyhock does extremely well. It reseeds. If you allow the flower stalks to dry and release seed naturally, new plants appear around the base and continue the cycle year after year. So the garden keeps the hollyhock look, even if individual plants are not permanent. June planting gives young plants time to build strong roots and foliage before winter, setting them up for bloom the following season. Plant hollyhocks in full sun with well-drained average soil in USDA zones 3 through 9. Give them airflow. That part matters. Hollyhocks are famous for a fungal problem called rust, which often begins on lower leaves as orange-brown spots before spreading upward. In many gardens, rust is mostly cosmetic, but it can make the lower part of the plant look rough by midsummer. The easiest design solution is to plant lower perennials in front of them. Let catmint, coreopsis, yarrow, or shorter flowers hide the lower foliage, while the hollyhock spikes rise beautifully behind them. And if you want self-seeding, resist the urge to cut everything down too early. Let some stalks dry fully. Let the seeds fall. Then thin the young rosettes where they appear too densely. That is how hollyhock becomes a repeating garden memory. Not one immortal plant, a self-renewing colony that keeps bringing those old-fashioned flower towers back into the summer garden. Verbena bonariensis is the self-seeder that makes a garden feel lighter. Most tall plants create mass. They block views. They cast shade. They stand like walls in the border. Verbena does the opposite. It rises on thin, wiry stems with small clusters of purple flowers floating high above the garden, almost like little clouds suspended in the air. You can plant it through the middle or back of a border without hiding everything behind it. That see-through quality is what makes Verbena bonariensis so valuable. It adds height without heaviness, movement without clutter, and from midsummer until frost, it keeps blooming when many other plants are already slowing down. Butterflies absolutely love it. Painted ladies, monarchs, swallowtails, and smaller garden butterflies often drift from flower to flower all day long, giving the border a living movement that feels effortless. But the reason verbena belongs in a self-seeding garden is what happens after bloom. Each flower cluster eventually produces seed, and if you leave the stems standing, those seeds fall gradually through late summer, autumn, and winter. In warm climates, Verbena bonariensis may behave as a short-lived perennial in USDA zones 7 through 11. In cooler zones like 5 and 6, it often acts more like a self-seeding annual. The original plant may not survive winter, but the seeds do the work. New seedlings appear the following spring, often in exactly the open spaces where the garden needed something airy and vertical. Planted in full sun with well-drained average soil. Do not overfeed it. Rich soil can make the stems too lush and floppy. Lean soil keeps the plant stronger and more graceful. The most important instruction is simple. Do not deadhead if you want it to return. Let the seed heads remain. And when tiny seedlings emerge, mark them before you start spring weeding. Young verbena seedlings can look unimpressive at first, and many gardeners accidentally remove the very plants they were hoping would come back. Verbena bonariensis teaches a beautiful lesson. Sometimes the plants that fill a garden best are the ones that never feel heavy. They simply float, seed, return, and stitch the whole border together. Feverfew looks like a cheerful little wildflower. Small white petals, bright yellow centers, soft green foliage with a sharp herbal scent when touched. At first glance, it does not seem like one of the most determined self-seeders in the garden. But once Tanacetum parthenium settles in, it can create an entire colony, almost without being asked. This plant has been grown for centuries in herb gardens, cottage gardens, monastery gardens, and old household medicine beds. It is especially known in herbal tradition for its association with headaches and migraine support, although anyone using it medicinally should treat it seriously and speak with a qualified professional, especially if they take medication, are pregnant, or have health conditions. In the garden, though, feverfew is simple, tough, and generous. It blooms from late spring through summer, producing clusters of tiny daisy-like flowers that brighten borders, herb beds, and pathway edges. The flowers are not huge or dramatic. Their power is in abundance. One plant becomes many flowers become many seed heads, and if you allow some of those seed heads to mature, feverfew drops enough seed to return again the following year with very little help from you. Planted in full sun to part shade with well-drained average soil in USDA zones 5 through 9. June planting gives feverfew time to establish, bloom, and begin setting seed before the season ends. But this is one self-seeder you should manage early. A single strong plant can produce dozens of seedlings within a couple of seasons if every seed is allowed to grow. That can be beautiful in a loose cottage garden, but overwhelming in a tight formal bed. So the trick is not stopping it completely. The trick is editing. In spring, when seedlings appear, keep the strongest ones where you want more flowers and pull the extras while they are still small. That keeps the garden full without letting it become crowded. Another useful feature is the aromatic foliage. Deer and rabbits often ignore feverfew, making it valuable along borders where softer plants get damaged. Feverfew teaches one of the best lessons of self-seeding gardens. A plant does not have to be rare, expensive, or dramatic to be powerful. Sometimes the most useful garden plants are the ones quietly returning every year, filling the empty places before you even notice they were bare. Valerian brings height, fragrance, and old-world medicinal history into a self-seeding garden. At first, it may not look dramatic. The foliage is soft and green. The plant spends its early growth building structure quietly. Then the flower stems rise, 4 to 5 feet tall. Clusters of tiny white to pale pink flowers open above the garden, carrying a sweet scent that drifts through warm summer air. That fragrance attracts more than people. Butterflies visit the flowers. Beneficial insects move through them. Lacewings, hoverflies, and parasitic wasps can use plants like valerian as part of a healthier garden ecosystem. And that is one reason this plant matters. It does not only fill space, it helps support the invisible workforce of the garden. Valeriana officinalis has also been used for centuries in herbal traditions, connected to sleep and relaxation. Its root is still widely known today in herbal products, but this is not something to use casually without understanding dosage, safety, and personal health conditions. In the garden, though, valerian is much easier to appreciate. It is a strong, useful, self-seeding perennial that thrives in the right place. Planted in full sun to part shade with moist, well-drained soil in USDA zones 4 through 9. Unlike drought-loving plants, valerian appreciates more consistent moisture, especially while establishing. June planting gives young plants time to root, grow upward, flower, and begin forming seed before the season ends. Once mature, it can self-seed freely in damp garden areas. That can be a gift or a problem depending on your space. So treat valerian the way you treat any generous self-seeder. Let some seed heads mature. Then, edit the seedlings in spring. Thin them to roughly 18 to 24 inches apart so the plants have enough room to stand tall without crowding one another. One unusual detail is worth knowing. The roots have a strong scent that can attract cats. Not every cat responds strongly, but if neighborhood cats often wander through your garden, place valerian where a little curiosity will not damage nearby plants. Valerian is not the neatest plant on this list. It is wilder, taller, more herbal, more atmospheric. But in a self-seeding garden, that can be exactly what you need. A plant that rises above the border, feeds beneficial insects, scents the evening air, and quietly returns through its own seed when the conditions are right. Sweet William feels like a flower from another time. Flat clusters of small, fragrant blooms, open in white, pink, red, burgundy, and beautiful bicolor patterns that look almost hand-painted. It has the softness of an old cottage garden, but the strength of a plant that knows how to keep itself going. Dianthus barbatus is usually grown as a biennial or short-lived perennial, but once it begins self-seeding, many gardeners treat it like a permanent resident. The original plant may not last forever, but the colony continues. That is the secret. You are not depending on one plant. You are building a repeating cycle. June planting gives Sweet William time to create strong, leafy rosettes before winter. Then the following May or June, those rosettes burst into bloom, filling the garden with color right in the gap between early spring flowers and summer perennials. That timing makes it valuable. Many gardens feel empty during that transition. Sweet William steps in exactly when the garden needs fresh energy. Planted in full sun to part shade with well-drained average soil in USDA zones 3 through 9. It does not need rich conditions or complicated care. What it does need is the chance to set seed. After flowering, allow some seed heads to dry naturally on the plant. Do not cut everything down too early. As the seeds mature and fall, new seedlings often appear in late summer or fall, forming small rosettes that sit through winter and bloom the next year. The fragrance is another reason to place it carefully. Sweet William smells strongest in the evening, making it perfect near pathways, porch steps, garden benches, or any place you pass slowly at the end of the day. Pollinators benefit too. Butterflies, hoverflies, and daytime moths visit the flowers during the late spring window when the garden is shifting seasons. And emotionally, Sweet William brings continuity. It feels old-fashioned in the best way. A flower that does not shout for attention, but quietly returns, reseeds, and keeps a cottage garden feeling alive year after year. Larkspur is one of the most elegant self-seeders for gardeners who love tall flowers, but do not want to replant them every year. The stems rise straight and graceful, carrying spikes of blue, purple, pink, lavender, and white flowers that appear in late spring and early summer, right when the garden needs height and drama. But larkspur does not behave like a summer perennial. It follows a cooler rhythm. Consolida ajotsis grows, blooms, drops seed, and then often fades back when summer heat becomes too intense. At first, that may seem like a weakness, but it is actually part of the plant's self-seeding strategy. The seeds fall into the soil, wait through seasonal cooling, and germinate when conditions become right again. In many climates, young seedlings appear in fall, overwinter as small rosettes, and bloom the following spring without you sowing another packet. That is how larkspur becomes permanent without the original plant being permanent. It creates a cycle, and once that cycle starts, the garden begins producing its own tall spring flower spikes year after year. Plant larkspur in full sun with well-drained average soil. It is adaptable across a wide range of USDA zones, but it performs best where seeds can experience some natural cold before germination. That cold period helps break dormancy, which is why fall and very early spring sowing often work so well. If you are starting the cycle in June, allow the plants to mature and drop seed naturally later in the season. Then let the next generation come from those seeds. Larkspur does not like transplanting. Its roots prefer to stay undisturbed, so direct sowing is usually better than moving seedlings around repeatedly. When seedlings emerge, thin them to about 9 to 12 inches apart, so each plant has enough space to grow strong flower spikes. There is one caution. Larkspur seeds are toxic if eaten, especially dangerous to grazing animals, so avoid planting it where livestock can access it. Used responsibly in ornamental beds, larkspur brings old-fashioned vertical beauty and a reliable self-seeding rhythm that makes spring gardens feel effortlessly full. Johnny Jump-Up is small enough to be overlooked, but once it settles into a garden, it can become one of the most enthusiastic self-seeders you will ever grow. The flowers look like tiny pansies, usually marked in purple, yellow, and white. With faces so bright they seem to appear overnight in paths, bed edges, gravel cracks, and the base of old walls. That is part of the charm. Viola tricolor does not always stay exactly where you put it. It wanders, but gently, and in a self-seeding garden, that wandering can feel magical. The plant spreads through a seed mechanism called ballicory, where the drying seed capsule snaps open and throws seeds away from the parent plant. That means new seedlings can appear several feet from where the original flowers grew. One year you plant them at the edge of a bed. The next year, they are blooming between paving stones, then at the base of a container, then along a gravel path where you never would have thought to plant anything. This is how Johnny Jump-Up makes a garden feel older, softer, and more natural. Planted in full sun to part shade with well-drained average soil in USDA zones 3 through 9. It prefers cooler weather and often performs best where the soil stays evenly moist, especially in dappled shade or areas protected from harsh afternoon heat. June planting gives it time to bloom, set seed, and begin the next generation before the season ends. But if you want self-seeding, do not remove every spent flower. Let the seed pods form. Let them dry. Let them open on their own. That is the whole point. Johnny Jump-Up also supports early season pollinators. Bumblebee queens emerging from hibernation often need small, accessible flowers before larger summer blooms begin, and violas help fill that early gap beautifully. The plant is not dramatic in the way lupins or foxgloves are dramatic. Its power is intimacy, tiny flowers appearing where you least expect them, color returning without invitation, a garden slowly stitching itself together in the cracks and edges. Johnny Jump-Up teaches one of the sweetest lessons in self-seeding gardening. Sometimes abundance does not arrive loudly. Sometimes it arrives as a small purple and yellow flower blooming in a place you never planned. Bronze fennel is one of the best self-seeders for gardeners who want height, texture, and wildlife value from one plant. At first it looks almost delicate. Fine bronze purple foliage rises in soft, feathery clouds, creating a hazy effect at the back of a border. But do not let that softness fool you. Funiculum vulgare purpureum can reach 5 to 6 feet tall, and once it matures, it becomes a real architectural presence in the garden. The foliage alone is beautiful enough to earn its place, but the flowers make it even more valuable. In summer, bronze fennel produces flat yellow flower clusters that attract an enormous range of beneficial insects. tiny wasps, hoverflies, bees, lady beetles, butterflies. The plant becomes a feeding station for the insects that quietly help keep a garden balanced. And for butterfly gardeners, bronze fennel is especially important because it serves as a host plant for swallowtail caterpillars. That means it does not just feed adult butterflies, it supports the next generation. This is where self-seeding becomes both a gift and a responsibility. Bronze fennel drops seed freely. In the right conditions, seedlings can appear all around the parent plant the following spring. That can be wonderful in a large naturalistic border, but too much in a small garden. So grow it with intention. Plant bronze fennel in full sun with well-drained average soil in USD A zones 4 through 9. Let some seed heads mature if you want it to return, but remove extras before every seed drops if your garden space is limited. In spring, thin seedlings early while they are small and easy to pull. One more practical warning. Keep bronze fennel away from dill if you are growing both for culinary use, because they can cross-pollinate and produce seedlings with less predictable flavor. Visually, bronze fennel pairs beautifully with roses, ornamental grasses, coneflowers, yarrow, and late-season perennials. Its dark, airy foliage makes surrounding flowers look brighter. And emotionally, it gives the garden a wild, living softness. A plant that feeds insects, hosts butterflies, returns from seed, and makes the whole border feel more alive. Lupin is one of the most spectacular self-seeding plants you can grow if your climate suits it. When the flower spikes rise, they do not whisper, they announce themselves. Dense towers of purple, blue, pink, red, yellow, and white stand above the foliage in late spring and early summer, creating the kind of vertical drama that makes an ordinary garden suddenly feel designed. But lupin is not only beautiful, it is useful underground too. Lupinus polyphyllus belongs to the legume family, which means it can form relationships with soil bacteria that help convert atmospheric nitrogen into a form plants can use. In simple terms, lupin can help improve the soil around it, while also producing some of the most dramatic flowers in the border. That is a rare combination. It thrives best in cool, moist climates with well-drained, slightly acidic soil. USDA zones 4 through 8 are generally ideal, especially in northern regions, coastal climates, higher elevations, or gardens where summer heat does not become extreme. In hot, humid areas, lupin often struggles unless given afternoon shade, steady moisture, and excellent drainage. This is one plant where location matters. June planting gives young lupins time to establish deeper roots before winter. And if you want better germination, lightly rub the seeds with sandpaper before planting. This process is called scarification, and it helps water penetrate the tough seed coat more easily. After flowering, let the seed pods dry on the plant. When mature, the pods twist open and scatter seeds naturally into the surrounding soil. If conditions are right, new seedlings appear and gradually form a colony. Do not expect perfect control. Lupin likes to choose its own spots, but that is part of its charm. Bumblebees love the flowers, and the bloom structure is almost built around their weight and movement. They land, press into the flower, and help release pollen as they feed. A mature patch of lupins feels alive with color and motion, and emotionally, lupin brings a kind of old-fashioned grandeur to the self-seeding garden. It is not subtle. It is not quiet. It is the plant that reminds you that a garden can still surprise you, even when it is doing the work itself. A garden that fills itself does not happen by accident. It happens when you choose plants that understand how to continue their own story. Black-eyed Susan drops seed for next summer's golden drifts. Coneflower feeds birds through winter before creating new plants in spring. Columbine changes color from one generation to the next. Foxglove and hollyhock return through seedlings, even after the original plants are gone. Verbena floats through the border, then quietly plants next year's movement. Feverfew, valerian, sweet william, larkspur, Johnny Jump Up, bronze fennel, and lupin all prove the same thing in different ways. The most powerful garden is not always the one you control the hardest. Sometimes it is the one you learn how to guide. Every seed head left standing is a small investment. Every seedling that appears in spring is proof the garden remembered what to do. And every year, if you manage it wisely, the space becomes fuller, softer, more alive, and less dependent on your wallet. That is the real beauty of self-seeding plants. They do not just bloom once. They build momentum. So if you are planting this June, start simple. Choose one plant for full sun, maybe black-eyed Susan or purple coneflower. Choose one for part shade, maybe columbine or Johnny Jump Up. And choose one that brings pollinators in strongly, maybe verbena, bronze fennel, or lupin. Let them flower. Let some seeds fall. Then next spring, look closely before you weed, because some of the most valuable plants in your garden may not come from a nursery tray. They may already be waiting in the soil. If this video helped you see your garden differently, subscribe, because every week we explore plants that make gardening more beautiful, more practical, and more alive. And before you go, tell me in the comments, which self-seeding plant are you planting this June? And which one do you already have returning on its own? A garden that fills itself does not begin with luck. It begins with the right seeds, the right timing, and knowing when to step back.